Ethan Clark wrote the letter on a Thursday that looked like it had forgotten how to be different from any other day. Gray sky pressed low over the school. Hallways echoed with footsteps that didn't belong to anyone in particular. Lockers slammed. Like punctuation marks nobody agreed on, sentences without meaning that still filled the air. Ethan sat at the far end of the cafeteria where noise softened into something distant enough to ignore, like it belonged to another life he wasn't part of. And then he opened his notebook. Not because he planned to, but because something inside him had been building for too long without a way out. Across the room, Lily Harper sat near the window. Always that seat. Always that distance from everyone, not in a way that looked lonely, but in a way that made her feel slightly unplaced in whatever room she was in. She laughed sometimes, but Ethan had noticed something strange about it. It never stayed. It appeared, did its job, then left her face as if it didn't belong there in the first place, like even happiness passed through her without deciding to stay. He looked down at the page and wrote her name. That alone felt like crossing a line he couldn't uncross. But he didn't stop. I don't know how to say this properly, so I'll just write it the way it feels. The pen hesitated above the page, then continued anyway. He wrote about noticing her without meaning to, how she always arrived early but never looked like she was waiting, how she sat like someone who had learned how to take up just enough space to not disappear, but never enough to be fully seen. He didn't make it poetic. He didn't make it beautiful. It was just true in a way that felt heavier than poetry. And then, at the bottom of the page, his hand slowed, paused, and wrote the sentence that changed everything, even though nothing around him moved. I think I like you. The words didn't feel dramatic. They didn't shake the world. They simply existed now. Permanent. Irreversible in a way he didn't understand yet. He closed the notebook immediately, as if closing it could undo what had already been understood by the world. The next day, he brought it again. Same table. Same distance. Same girl by the window who didn't know she had become the center of something she hadn't asked for. But now the letter wasn't just ink. It was inside him, too. Alive in a way thoughts become when they stop being private. He told himself he would give it to her today. Today felt different, except it didn't. Lunch came. Then it ended, and Lily stood, up early, as she sometimes did, slipping into the flow of students leaving without ever looking like she was running from anything. And again. The moment passed. Again. That became the pattern. Ethan would write. Ethan would watch. Ethan would hesitate at the exact same threshold where everything important waited, and every time he stepped back instead of forward. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly choosing safety over risk, until safety became its own kind of regret. Weeks passed like that. Then came the announcement, end-of-term cleanouts, old notebooks collected, books donated, anything left behind would be cleared. Ethan didn't think much of it at first, until his teacher started gathering stacks from desks. "Take anything personal home," she said casually. He nodded, but when he got home that evening, something felt wrong, too light, too empty. He opened his bag. The notebook was gone. At first, his mind refused to understand it. Then it clicked. Cleanout, donation pile, library. And for the first time, panic arrived quietly. Not loud, just slow, like something closing behind him without sound. 2 weeks later, he saw her outside school. Lily Harper stood near the gate. Not in uniform, holding something in her hands. His notebook. Ethan stopped walking. The world didn't continue properly for a second, like it had missed a step. She looked up, and their eyes met. Not dramatic, just direct, like two truths colliding without explosion. "I think this belongs to you," she said. Ethan stepped forward slightly. "Where did you get that?" "The library donation box," she replied. "It got mixed in with old books." He stared at her. A pause. Then quietly, "You read it?" It wasn't a question. Lily nodded once. Yes. Silence expanded between them. Not awkward. Heavier, like something had finally been placed on the table that neither of them knew how to move. Ethan's voice dropped. "You weren't supposed to." "I know," she said, and somehow that made it worse, because she didn't sound guilty. She sounded careful, like she had stepped into something fragile and was still trying not to break it further just by speaking. She held the notebook a little tighter, then asked, "You were going to give this to me?" Ethan opened his mouth, closed it again, because the truth was suddenly simple in a way that hurt. No, he wasn't going to give it. He was only ever going to write it. That realization stood between them now, unavoidable, unpolished. Real. Lily looked down briefly, then said something that changed the shape of the moment completely. "I used to notice you too." Ethan frowned slightly. "You did?" She nodded. "At lunch, you always looked like you were trying not to exist too loudly." That sentence hit harder than anything else so far, because it was exactly right. "I thought you never saw me," he said quietly. "I did," she replied. "I just didn't know if I was supposed to." The word "supposed" lingered in the air. Not feelings. Rules. The invisible rules they had both been living inside without noticing. A long silence passed. Then Lily held out the notebook again. "Take it," she said. Ethan hesitated. "You can keep it." She shook her head. "It's not mine." A pause, then softer. "It feels like something you were still becoming." That made something tighten in his throat, because no one had ever said something like that without making it feel like a flaw. He took it back slowly. Their fingers didn't touch, but something between them still changed, like a line had been crossed without movement. Lily shifted slightly, then said, "It was honest." Ethan nodded. "I don't think people are honest like that much," she added. A pause. Then she turned slightly like she might leave. But Ethan spoke before he could stop himself. "I should have given it to you," he said quickly. She stopped, didn't turn fully. "I know," she said, a beat, then quieter. "But I think I was always going to read it anyway, one way or another." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" Now she turned back. Not distant, just real. "It means," she said, "that some things don't wait for courage." A pause. They just wait for timing. Then she stepped back and walked away. Not like a moment ending, but like life continuing anyway. Ethan stood there holding the notebook again, but it didn't feel like paper anymore. It felt like something that had finally been understood, not because it was spoken, but because it had been seen. And now he understood something quietly devastating. He hadn't missed his chance. He had just lived beside it long enough to not recognize it while it was still happening.